just to let things go. But just like with our children, maybe we want to let discipline, we don't want to have to deal with the discipline, or we don't have to deal with the problems, and we just let things go. But in the long run, that's not good for them. Sometimes in the workplace, we might want to let things slide. But if you do that, then those things are just going to snowball, and eventually you're going to have to deal with them, but probably they're going to be much worse at that point than if we just stop and deal with those things as they develop. And so we need to be willing to keep our employees honest, be willing to keep them in that straight and narrow, so to speak. And this is, like I said, often difficult and is but is required. And so, just with well, we've said this before, this last point, everything a manager does should be done with the knowledge that they have a higher ranking boss in heaven. And so the injustices of employers and managers, if they're not punished here on earth, would ultimately be punished one day. And so, everybody's going to get what they deserve. If not here on earth, then in the life hereafter, everyone will get exactly what they deserve. And so we need to realize that on both sides of the equation there. If someone's doing something to us and unjustly, if we have an unjust boss or manager or whatever, ultimately they're going to get what they deserve, and we need to let God handle that. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to work as God would have us to work, and then let Him take care of that person in the day of judgment, because they will get exactly what they deserve. And so we need to understand this. And so the golden rule applies basically in all relationships. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12, therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. And so this rule, or as men have given it the name, the golden rule. I mean, this applies to every relationship that we have, and we need to be willing to do to people like we would want them to do to us. And as a boss, that means being patient, being understanding. A lot of times you have maybe a big order that you have to get out. Things are busy. You've got customers on the phone pushing you, trying to get you to produce these things, and then maybe you've got an employee that has family trouble, their sickness or something like that, and you want to, you really want to be hard on them. You need to be at work. You need to be here because I need you. But sometimes they may need that time, and you may need to give them that time, even though it's going to affect your bottom line, in order to do to them like you would want someone to do to you, to give you that time, and if you needed it as well. And so this rule, these guidelines are to there to guide us in just any relationship that we have. And so even employers and masters are in some ways submissive to those under them. And so we are all submissive to each other. We all have obligations. None of us are just solely on that receiving point. We need to be giving as well. And so we need to be understanding. We need to be we need to be patient. And this is something that is difficult as an employer sometimes to do, because we get so focused on producing and getting our jobs done. Yes, Tim, go ahead.
Shane, I think you explained everything well. No matter your role, male, female, young, old, you can exercise leadership in that role. I've been thinking about leadership a lot, and talking to some kids as I encounter them daily. A real good example of leadership is the Civil War. There were distinct advantages with manpower and money and resources, but the North was behind in the beginning of the war for lack of leadership.
Yeah.
It wasn't until Lincoln demanded and ordered them away from the boardroom and out front. I think there's some examples where he actually insisted they get on their horse and get out front.
Yeah.
That they had failures till they finally found a real leader in U.S. Grant, and then they,
Yeah.
he demanded leadership out front.
And leadership means getting out front and understanding. And in any business, my grandfather, he told me constantly that the third generation is usually the one that loses the business. I don't know how many times I heard that. And, it took me a while to kind of understand what he was talking about. You have the first generation that gets out, they're working hard for it, they're staying up late at night, trying to get those things done. And so it means a lot to them. The second generation comes along, they have to work hard too, but not necessarily as hard as the first generation. But the business gets off the ground, things get going good. The third generation, a lot of times, they come in and it's just handed to them. And so they want to sit behind the desk and they want to point and they want to tell people what to do. And they're not out front looking at what actually needs to be done. And we see this in our line of business. I mean, I've seen it over and over and over again with other nurseries in this area and in other parts of the country where that third generation, it just falls to pieces. I mean, I've visited nurseries where the third generation was there leading that, or I put that in quotation. They weren't really leading, but you get there and plants had just been laying over that. Looked like they fell over and they'd been laying over for a year or two and they were just dead. And you could tell that there was no leadership there because the employees aren't going to take the initiative, and the leadership or the management wasn't out there looking at what needs to be done. They want to stay in the air conditioning in the office. And it's just, that's not what it takes. Leadership means getting out in front. And we can be a leader, as Tim says, no matter what position we hold. We have numerous examples throughout history, even in this congregation, where you have someone that starts out at the bottom in some industry or in some business or something like that. And over time, they end up leading that company because they were willing to be a leader in what they were doing, whether it was sweeping the floor or managing the entire company. They were willing to be a leader and they were willing to give it their all. And so people recognize that. If it's not recognized by your current company, somebody else is going to recognize that. And so it's just going to be better for you in the long run. And it may be difficult at times, and you may get a lot of flack from your fellow employees. But we need to be a leader. We as Christians are called to be leaders, and so we must be willing to do that. So good point, Tim. Does anybody have anything else they want to say there? Okay, the last part here of this section of this verse 9 says, and there is no partiality with him. There is no partiality with God. And so when God looks down on us here on earth and he sees the most powerful, most rich person on earth, and then he sees the poorest person laying in the ditch, there is no partiality. He sees them both as the same. And so we need to understand that. So no matter what position I hold within a company, within my family, within this congregation, in the community, it doesn't matter. God looks at me the same as he looks at everyone else. And he demands the same sort of things out of us. He understands that we have different abilities, but what he does demand is that we do the best we can, no matter what abilities we have. And so he's not necessarily looking at those abilities. He's looking at our willingness to fulfill or to use those abilities to do whatever we can. And so when the Lord returns, distinctions of social position will be dissolved and man's earthly rank will have no meaning whatsoever. And so on the day of judgment, your rank here on earth, your social rank, is going to mean absolutely nothing. It will be worthless. It'll be less than worthless. And so we need to understand that on the most important day, our social rank will mean nothing. And so if we put so much effort into trying to change that, then, it's just going to be bad for us on that day. Christ is going to reward each person without partiality and favoritism, as we saw there in Colossians 4 and verse 1. So when Christians hold this kind of mental or mutual submission for their servants, their masters, employees, employers, everyone, and treat each other in the manner that they wish Christ to treat them, then justice, peace, and prosperity will engulf society. And so, of course, I know we're talking about when we make statements like this, we're speaking of some utopia that, I believe will probably never exist, because we know who the ruler of this world is, and that's Satan. Satan is affecting a lot of things here. And so this, we would love to get here when it comes to our country, but we never will. We never will. And we all understand that, but we can get there here. Within these walls, within the church here, we can get there. We can get there if we try. And so, this is an ideal thing. Each of us are, we're fallible. We're going to make mistakes. But if everyone else is patient, if they will correct us with humility, and we understand that where that correction's coming from, all those things, and we're just treating each other like we want to be treated, we as a congregation can get there. But we need to endeavor, as we go out into the world, we need to endeavor to do this, even though we may never, this society may never reach that pinnacle of this utopia that we're describing here. We need to act like we're trying as Christians to do that. And so, when we quit trying, then Satan's going to win. And so we need to be the type of people that treat others the way we want to be treated, whether we are in charge or whether we are following. And so it's very important for us to understand these things. And so that finishes up with this lesson, verses 1 through 9. Does anybody have any other comments on this employer-employee relationship or anything else that we've talked about previous to this in these studies? Yes.
It almost sounds like you're in the business world. And I say that joking, but I say what I say is true.
Yeah.
Because you are in the business world. You've been able to bring so much practicality to these 5 verses.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It's I had good teachers, and I know I use my family as an example a lot. But when it comes to hard work, my father and grandfather are, they're very hard workers, and they were determined to instill in their children and grandchildren that ethic. And they were hard, but they were fair. And so they weren't perfect by any means. They were far from perfect. I was thinking about Dad this morning, and even some of the newer guys that have started working since Dad has gotten sick. He was out a year or two after his surgery, and they would say, that old man there can, he's worth, and you may think this is racially prejudiced or whatever, but here you had Hispanics telling other Hispanics, like, you wouldn't believe that, but that old man there is worth 2 Mexicans. And if you want high praise from a Mexican, that to me, that's pretty high. And the other ones are like, no, there's no way that old white man could be worth 2 Mexicans. But that's the way he led. He was out there. Now, a lot of times he let management fall behind because he was so focused on being out there working that sometimes he needed to manage. And sometimes that didn't happen. but he was focused on working and working hard. And if it was raining, he was the first one out the door. And so a lot of good examples there. And so I've been very fortunate to have those examples. But yeah, and Dad also was very lenient to guys. You know, there's people that owe him money that he'll never get paid. Employees, because he was lenient, and he gave them what they were needing at that point. And so anyway, didn't mean to get on all that. I'm sorry I spent that time. Any other comments or anything there? Yeah, Dylan.
If I could, just going back to that phrase, getting unthreatening, and this hasn't been one of your discussion, but I apologize for kind of diverting it back to this, but just given the context of this instruction, it being, the specific application for the Ephesians, this servitude, it's unfortunate when you even look at commentaries written by brethren, members of the church 200 years ago, 100 years ago, that they were advocating the type of servitude, slavery that was evidenced in this country. But you see here, as you have made the application over to our current day society, the type of master relationship, master example that's to be done. That there was no defense for that. If you look just at that phrase, giving up threat, and then you go back to do the same things to them, and then you apply the golden rule as you did.
Yeah.
As I said, it's unfortunate when you, and I'm not trying to get into this whole discussion, but like I said, just specifically brethren, when you read commentaries written by brethren 200 years ago, what they were advocating for, and it's nowhere, the type of servitude that, as you hit on initially when you opened the study, that was being regulated, that this passage regulates, was not what was seen in this country. And again, it's just unfortunate that we have brethren who were arguing to the contrary of that. There was this type of slavery that we saw in this country that they were propping up. It's just, you can't defend it with this passage, you can't defend it with the other passages that you've examined. So I appreciate, Brother Hall, your application to us as well.
Yeah, and that's in that relationship and what we saw during that time, like you said, it's just there was nothing Christ-like about that in a lot of ways. Maybe there were some, I don't know, but the vast majority, I think, could not be labeled as Christ-like whatsoever. And you think of as you were talking, and that that submission and that sacrifice. There again, I'll go back to actually Dad and Chris during the 2008 recession. Things were bad for us. We had gone a couple of years without selling hardly anything, and the bank accounts were very low. They had to borrow money just to make payroll, and knowing that the employees, it would be difficult for them to get jobs other places, and so they borrowed money to make payroll and didn't get paid themselves. And so that's the type of sacrifice that employers need to be willing to make. I mean, when you take on that role, and again, I liken it to in a lot of ways a parent-child relationship. Your employees are depending on you to be a good leader, to be a good manager, to provide, to keep things going in a way that's going to provide, jobs for them in the future, and that, that's how they feed their family. And so, here you have not only these specific employees, but their families depending on what you're doing. And once you take on that role, then you need to be willing to do what you need to do. In a lot of ways, that's a sacrificial role in doing that when times get hard. And that's what a lot of people don't see, and a lot of businesses don't do. I mean, you have, and we see it all the time, people that, do these jobs and they, before they even pay their bills, they take a trip to Disney World. Then they come back and they're not able to pay their bills. And, that's what I've tried to instill in my children. You pay your bills first, and then whatever is left over, then you go. But that's poor management. That's poor management, and your employees will suffer, and you don't need to be doing things like that. And so it's those relationships, like you said, were just we see no correlation with that. And so it is definitely a sacrificial role when you take on that role. And a lot of early mornings or late nights laying in bed, worrying about things, trying to figure things out. What are we going to do tomorrow? That goes along with it. And so when you begin to take on that role, you need to understand that it's not just going to be about you. And there's a lot more to it. And a lot of people just don't understand that. And so you end up with a lot of bosses and not a lot of leaders. Any other comments there? All right, we have just a few minutes left, and we'll dip our toe here into lesson 16. This lesson is entitled "Be Strong in the Lord," and it deals with begins at verse 10 and goes to the end of the chapter. But Paul finishes up there in verse 9 the discussion of subjection and submission, and so we've talked a lot about that. We've talked a lot about subjection and submission, not only when I was teaching, when Dylan was teaching, and even Reuben, and so a lot of Ephesians has dealt with that. But now he begins to speak of the great battle that is going on. And it's this battle between good and evil. Satan is trying to control the world. And so what he's doing is making sure the Ephesians understand this battle that's going on all around them at all times. What's going on, and they understand that, and he's exhorting them to be prepared to fight. And so this great battle that was going on thousands of years ago, that Paul is trying to exhort these Ephesians to stand up and be prepared to fight, that same battle is going on today. It's going on in this city, it's going on in this state, in this country. It's still raging. And so even though we may not recognize that or see that, it's still there. And the fact that sometimes we are blinded to it is proof that Satan is winning. Because if Satan can keep us from seeing that battle, he's won the battle. Because then he's able to do whatever he wants to do without anyone standing up against him. And so here Paul is going to encourage the Ephesians, and in doing so encourage us to see the battle, to recognize the battle, and be prepared to fight in that battle. Because as we step out from this building this morning, we're going out into the battle. We're going out to fight throughout this next week. And even sometimes we may have to fight here within these walls, because the battle sometimes creeps into the church. And I think we are all well aware of that. And we all recognize that sometimes the battle creeps in these doors. And so we need to be prepared to fight here. We need to be prepared to fight outside as well, because Satan is moving here on earth. He's working. He has plans. He has schemes. He has things. He has others who are working with him. And so we need to understand that. And so as we read, let's read verses 10 through 12 of Ephesians chapter 6. It says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." And so here Paul is saying we need to be ready to stand against the wiles of the devil. These things that he has just described, these things that we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, but all these principalities, these powers, these rulers of darkness of this age, these spiritual hosts of wickedness, they haven't left this world. They are still here in some form. Now, I may not be able to explain to you exactly what all of these things are, but I don't have to necessarily explain all these things. If someone wants to get prepared to do that for us, I'm more than willing to allow you to. But I don't have to know exactly what they are to believe that they are here, and that they are bad, and that they are working against me. Whatever they are, I need to be ready to battle that. And I need to be prepared for that. And that's what that's what we're going to be discussing as we work through this lesson here. Being ready to stand against the wiles of the devil. And so he begins there in verse 10. He says, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. And so we need to understand where our strength comes from. And we've said this time and time again, but I think we need to be reminded our strength comes from the Lord. When we begin relying on our own strength, on our own abilities, on our own whatever, we are setting ourselves up to fail. But true strength, true power, true might comes from the Lord. And the strength that we need comes from the Lord and not of ourselves. So he says, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. So, he's not telling us to be strong in our own abilities, in our own way of thinking, in our own capabilities and schemes. No, we are to lay that aside. We are to be strong in the Lord, in the power of his might. That's where our real strength comes from. So this strength and this power goes beyond our own, and it is a great power. We look at what he's already stated in this epistle as we go back to Ephesians 1 and verse 19. It says, and what is the exceeding greatness of his power toward us who believe, according to the working of his mighty power. And so here again, he emphasizes the greatness of God's mighty power. That is the power that you and I can possess because he's offering that to us. We can be strong because we can lean upon that power. Ephesians chapter 3, verses 16 and 17, that he would grant you according to the riches of his glory to be strengthened with might through his Spirit in the inner man, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you being rooted and grounded in love. And so, here again, we are rooted and grounded in the love of Christ, in his power. We're strengthened through the might of his Spirit. All these things are available to us, but we must rely on that and not on ourselves. Ephesians 3 and verse 20 says, now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us. And so this power that can do exceedingly above what we can even ask, we can ask for a lot, but God's power can do more than what we could even ask for, what we could even comprehend or think up in our own mind. I mean, how many times have you seen God's power work in a way that you didn't even think of? A lot of times we're praying, we're asking for things, and we think that it's got to go this one way, and it doesn't. But then we get a year or two down the road and we look back and we're like, if that had happened, I wouldn't be here. This wouldn't have happened. God's wisdom, God's power worked beyond what we were able to even ask or think. Because it's that great. It's that good. And so many times we spend so much time praying and asking and wishing for things that we think or that we think are the best. When oftentimes we need to just say, God, you know what's best. You do your thing. And just give me the wisdom and the faith to accept that. Tim.
In verse 20 that you just quoted, I've heard it described as a verse filled with superlatives.
Yeah.
If the verse had originally been phrased that God can do above all that you can ask or think.
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing above that. But then they put in those other words, exceedingly. If it was exceedingly above all you can ask or think. But he went a step further and it's exceedingly abundantly beyond what you can ask or think. And then there's the above.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of the verse that eye has not seen nor heard the things that's been prepared, and I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
we just can't imagine the power that's available to us. When we try and conceive that, we just need to try and be wise enough to rely on it.
Yeah.
And ask for the wisdom to understand this awesome power. It's exceedingly abundantly above all that we can even think.
Yeah, I mean, you said this awesome power, and we think of, maybe the sun as being the biggest source of power that we can really imagine. I mean, and the amount of, and I don't know the figures, but I've read what men have tried to assume that how much power the sun has, and it's in our minds, we just can't comprehend it, but God's power, his wisdom, his ability exceeds that vastly. It's above, we can't even think of that, but it's so much more than that. And so what we need to understand is we just need to be willing to accept that. And so that's a very good point. These super superlatives. I mean, we get, we are so childlike, or I don't even know, even if that's a good comparison, but you think of a child and they don't really understand how the world works, and that's why parents guide them. But, even the child-parent relationship just pales in comparison to the knowledge and the wisdom that God has and his understanding. There is no comparison. And so we need to be willing just to accept that. So I really appreciate everyone's attention, those who made comments. Thank you so much. And so, Lord willing, next week we will pick up there in verse 10 and kind of continue and look at the principles here that Paul is sharing with the Ephesians. Thank you.